Hey everyone, welcome to another Power Monkey podcast. On today's episode, Chad and I interviewed Dr. Rudy Tanzi. Dr. Tanzi is a professor of neurology at Harvard Medical School. He is also one of the foremost researchers when it comes to Alzheimer's disease. He is an author. He has written 4 books, 3 of which he co-wrote with Deepak Chopra. And he is absolutely one of the most important people over the last 40 plus years when it comes to the most advanced research with Alzheimer's. He's an incredible resource when it comes to what's going on with the brain when it comes to Alzheimer's as we age. And we take some of the things that he's been working on and talk about how we can apply them to the fitness world. He has an acronym, SHIELD, which is a great resource that I think has a lot of application to what we already do with our fitness community. And we dive a little bit into what he's doing, not only with his patients, but something he does with the New England Patriots as well with regards to the SHIELD program. So it was a pleasure to speak with Dr. Tanzi. Incredible amount of research, incredible amount of knowledge, all rolled up into a little package here that I think is digestible. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. Well, Dr. Tanzi, thank you so much for taking the time to jump on the podcast with us. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
And so off the air, before we got going, we're telling you a little bit about who we are with Power Monkey and who Chad and I are in terms of our backgrounds in athletics. Chad being part of 2 Olympic teams on the weightlifting world and myself being part of USA Gymnastics for a number of years. And translating what you do in the scientific world into a little bit of what we're trying to do with the fitness community. And before we get into even your expertise, which is vast, and I want to go into, we want to start out with a question that we normally end our podcast with. And I think it might be a good jumping off point in terms of getting an appreciation for where you come from. We normally ask our guests at the end which sport or discipline they prefer, weightlifting or gymnastics. Do you have a preference between either weightlifting or gymnastics? You're going to get on one of our good sides and bad sides here.
That's right. That's right.
Well, I've only done weightlifting, and the only gymnastics I did once was to call the horse, and
you done pommel
I was
horse?
good at it I was good at it for about a year in 9th grade, and was on a team, and then I wasn't.
Well, there you go, Dave. There's your answer. We'll take that as a point for me with
that scissor thing.
They're called scissors. Absolutely.
I was actually
wow,
kind of like a little star in my class for being the only guy who could do that. So that was it. That was the extent of my gymnastics. But I always did, weightlifting at some level. I still have I still keep a medicine ball down next to the TV, so I can do that.
All right. So the fact that he did some pommel horse is actually pretty impressive. I'll take that as something. But if weightlifting is your preferred, Chad gets a point for this one. Chad's way behind in our tally here, so it's going to be a big point for Chad in our eventual totals here. So
absolutely, I'm gonna need to supercharge my brain with some of your content to figure out how I can beat Dave in this.
So can we give a little bit of background, Dr. Tanzi, in terms of the research that you do with Alzheimer's and just your background in general, where you're coming in from, and what you're working on right now?
Yeah, so I'm a professor at Harvard Medical School, and at Mass General Hospital, where my lab is, I serve as vice chair of neurology, but I'm mainly serving roles as director of a large Alzheimer's research operation. So I've been researching Alzheimer's disease my entire career. I discovered the first Alzheimer's genes. I still continue to discover new ones. I've made many human brain organoid models of Alzheimer's for drug discovery, drug development. So it's, genes to drugs and therapies. And some of the drugs I've developed are actually in trials or already worked in some trials for other diseases like ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, et cetera. And but I also serve as co-director of a brain health center. So instead of treating patients, we take care of people who are well or worried, and we tell them how to keep their brains healthy and how to stave off, what's the best thing they can do to stave off brain diseases of aging, like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, et cetera. And exercise and diet is a big part of that. And the only other thing I'll say is I wrote 3 books. I wrote 4 books actually, but the last 3 books were with Deepak Chopra on the brain and on genetics. And the newest one is The Healing Self, which is how to limit the amount of inflammation in your body and brain as you age, because that's the main enemy that really takes out your body and brain as you get older, is inflammation. And again, diet and exercise and sleep play huge roles in limiting inflammation and controlling your immune reactions.
Right.
So that's the gamut, basically.
Well, I mean, obviously, the number of decades that you've spent tackling this incredibly challenging disease has been monumental in terms of its advances. And one of the things that I came across that I think you touched on a little bit was your applications to the prevention side, and to be a little bit more proactive when it comes to it, as opposed to always being reactive once Alzheimer's has set in. And one of the things that you've been promoting is your acronym SHIELD. And I wanted to go through this a little bit in terms of each piece, because I think there's a lot of pieces in here that we can apply also back to the fitness world and things that we actually recommend with the clients that we work with. Would you mind kind of walking us through a little bit of SHIELD, and we can maybe talk about each one specifically?
Yeah, sure. When I wrote the last book and I had to start giving some lectures on it, the more public lectures, I was literally trying to think about how to encapsulate all of the instructions that we gave in, for everyday life, what we call the 7-day action plan. This was in the Healing Self book. And I was literally, I keep a pad in the shower, like one of these, I think it's called Aqua Notes. And on the pencil says, don't let those good ideas go down the drain. Because sometimes, in the shower, it's like kind of meditative. You kind of get in that meditative space and you get these ideas. And then you go out of the shower and it's like, what the heck was I thinking about? It all goes away. So I came up with that acronym SHIELD. My alternative acronym was FRESH, keeping your brain fresh. And I have similar one for FRESH if you want to hear that one. But SHIELD, the S stands for sleep. And these are not in any order of priority. It's just they fit the word SHIELD. And so sleep is so important because it's during sleep that you clean your brain. So two things happen during sleep. One is that it's when the brain literally cleans itself. You have these cells in the brain called microglia, and they do everything. They clean. They're like little sentinels that keep like watchdogs in case there's an infection. If there's an infection, they change into little killers and start killing everything in sight. And they're double-edged swords, because when they're cleaning, they're good. But if while cleaning, they eat some part of a nerve cell, they assume there's an infection, even if there's not. That's just how they evolved over the last, tens of thousands of years. And that causes neuroinflammation, inflammation in the brain. So when you sleep, it keeps them more in that active cleaning state and out of the neuroinflammation state. So I like to think of sleep as mental floss. Floss. Get it? And the other thing during sleep is, dreams are actually very purposeful. Dreams are actually taking everything you've learned your whole life and then creating fictional accounts from those scenes. So it's taking scenes that you've actually experienced and then broadcasting them as fictional dramas. And it's a way of actually maintaining memory, because you can't, we're not tape recorders. We're not video recorders. We can't memorize everything, right? But during the day, all these little things that happen trigger memories subconsciously. And at night, you have dreams that recapitulate those memories in fictional ways to actually reinforce them. So dreaming is very important as a way of consolidating memory.
Interesting. Now, would you say, I've heard you talk about like an optimal 7 to 8 hours is kind of what you want to be trying to aim towards. If you're not able to get that, even napping during the day is beneficial. But is there a phase of sleep that's most beneficial in terms of the cleaning process that happens? Is it the REM sleep? Is it stages 3 and 4? Are there certain stages where it's kind of optimal to actually allow for that cleaning process to happen?
Yeah, it's actually before and after REM. So, it's really mostly during that stage 4 deep sleep that the cleaning goes on. So it's kind of like during dreaming, your brain is active and you're recapitulating events in some fictional way as dreams. And that's actually creating more debris, because whenever you're thinking and active, it's like being active in the house. You're creating refuse and garbage. And then and then later on you take the garbage out. So it's after dreaming, all that protein debris that was made during the day and then during the dreams, then it gets cleaned out. And the brain literally breaks it up into little pieces. And then the brain literally constricts itself and forces it out through the lymphatic system.
Wow.
And this is really new information. We didn't even know the brain had a lymphatic system until my colleague Yanni Kipnis discovered that several years ago. So we had no idea that the brain was literally cleaning itself. And physically, you'd think lifting weights is hard. Try being a brain with no muscles and having to constrict all that crap out, right? That's an Olympian as well.
That's right.
So,
Well, one of the things that we use
and gymnastic too.
Right, sure,
Gymnastic
absolutely.
ability. I don't want to miss
the brain. The brain is a combination of a gymnast and a weightlifter all in one.
Olympian gymnast.
That's right.
You guys are the brain.
So one of the things that we use, I don't know if you use one of these, like a fitness tracker that tracks kind of sleep patterns, things like that. Would you find those to be helpful to use in terms of being able to see whether or not you're reaching the stages of sleep that you need?
I use a Fitbit just to, just to roughly keep track of my sleep patterns. Yes. And I also like to keep track of whether, snoring and sleep apnea. So I use an app called Sleep Score. I had never heard of it, but then you probably, Mariel Hemingway, who's an actor, and she's Ernest Hemingway's granddaughter, and her husband, Bobby Williams, is like a super athlete guy. And so they turned me on to it. And he said, once you start paying attention and knowing how much you snore at night through this app, it actually teaches you about, how, it's like subconsciously when you sleep, you might control your breathing better. It's actually, I'm sleeping better now that I'm using it. So, and those are the two I use, Sleep Score and the Fitbit.
Awesome. Chad, do you
use
any?
I don't have any commercial ties to either of them.
Right. Chad, do you have any? I know I use Whoop, which is another Boston-based company actually, and they work a lot in the fitness space. But I was curious, Chad, do you have any right now that you're using for sleep?
No, I don't have any tracker. I've looked into a few of them a little bit, but I've never taken the step to actually do that. But I mean, it seems like every expert that we have on is naming sleep as their first go-to for everything, nutrition and training. So I probably should keep track of that a little bit better. But I kind of wish I could go back to the hardcore training days as well, when I was training for the Olympics and everything, because I was certainly sleeping a little longer at that point. I got at least a 2-hour nap every day. So I think I was doing a lot of brain cleaning at that time, and I need a little more now.
Getting 9 hours is even better. I mean, I get 7 to 8, but on the weekends I try to get 9. I also do brain health advising for the Patriots, England Patriots, and I'm Bill Belichick's brain health advisor, go-to guy. And Tom Brady, when he was with the team in those good old days, he insisted on minimally 9 hours of sleep.
Wow.
So he did 9 to 10 hours per night. And
that's amazing.
I think that's been a big part of his success as he continues.
I know you're a Patriots fan and everything, and obviously seeing Brady in the Super Bowl next week is probably heartbreaking as a Patriots fan. But one of the things I thought was interesting, a couple weeks ago, they showed a picture of Tom Brady being 43 plus a certain number of days old and being the oldest quarterback to play in a playoff game versus the previous oldest quarterback to play in a playoff game. And it was George Blanda, and he was 43 and a certain number of days slightly younger than Brady. And they showed a side-to-side picture of the two of them. And Brady looks like a 25-year-old model, like still perfect shape, unbelievable. And Blanda looks like he's like 85. Like, I don't know how he still has a jersey on. It's unbelievable. So I would say that probably diet, sleep, nutrition, all these things have drastically changed over the course of the last 50 years to allow these athletes to actually see, okay, getting 9-10 hours of sleep not only allows me to do things like clean my brain, but actually allow me to perform for much longer periods of my career as well. It was pretty interesting. If you haven't seen it, I would check that out.
Tom, is he's a rare specimen. I mean, he's very strict about his diet, and he's very much in that pliability. So, I don't consider myself a muscular guy, but he would feel my arm and my muscle, and he'd say, it's too stiff. It's too, you have to, I'm like, I never thought of myself as being too muscular, but
Mm.
like he really, for his own game, he insists on pliability. That's why he does a lot of this. I went to the guy one of the guys who does his, massaging,
Mm-hmm.
like
The
when
T12.
they turn him into veal, like that. And at TB12, yeah. And so one of the guys he has a number of guys who does it for him, but this guy did me, and I got to tell you, I was like trying not to be a wimp. I was like ready to cry out in pain. Like I was literally losing my breath, like in pain when he was working on it. This guy was, NHL hockey player. And he's holding on to a bar on the ceiling to get more leverage as he's shoving his knee into my back. I thought I was going to die. And and then that night, I was like trying to watch TV with my wife, and I couldn't even sit on the couch. Like I was in so much pain. And this is when they were, TB12 wanted me to join their scientific advisory board at that time. And I was like, join the scientific advisory board. I would sue these guys. Like, I don't even think I can speak to well, the thing is, the next day I got up and I never felt better in my life. Like,
Wow.
I felt 20, 30 years younger. Like,
wow, that's amazing.
Wow.
And it lasted for like a full day and a half, and then it went away. But so he's got something going over there for sure.
So that pain was worth it?
It was worth it. And I actually have a device back there that in my office here that does like hardcore. It's kind of like what that guy did. Like you hold it with your hands, you can like push it up against your body, and it does the kneading.
Mm-hmm.
And you can actually make it painful. It's so strong. So I use that now, and just and sometimes even make myself wince in pain. But it really does work, because I swim in the morning, and swimming actually can, when you're at my age, it can take a toll on your back.
Sure.
Yeah.
Interesting. So just since we're talking about football, I'm just curious about the prevalency of concussion rates, and just whether or not you've seen CTE and the concussion rates be a factor in what you're seeing with Alzheimer's, and whether or not that's something that you're studying just from a concussion standpoint. Is that one of the roles that you're actually playing with football players? How those things are kind of paralleling each other?
Yeah. So the role I'm playing is to use SHIELD. We use SHIELD, in this brain health center. That
Mm-hmm.
SHIELD is the basis for our ideal brain health care questionnaire and advice that we give people who come in. And I use SHIELD with the team, and been doing that for a while. I guess in terms of CTE, I do keep track at the games on the sidelines. This year, because of COVID, I wasn't on the sidelines, but any other year, normally I'm on the sidelines with the team, and just keeping track of who's banging their head the most, or who gets tackled and has their head hit. It's the bobblehead effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
We actually showed this in the lab that it's not the impact, it's the head shaking really fast that matters. We actually, Lee Goldstein at Boston University and I discovered that. It was really Lee's experimental paradigm that discovered that, Lee Goldstein. And so what happens is the head shakes so fast that nerve endings literally get sheared and cut. And when that happens, that drives a pathology in those nerve cells called tangles, neurofibrillary tangles. And tangles are also what kill nerve cells in Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference. In Alzheimer's, it's a material called amyloid, right, that makes up plaques. And I discovered the first Alzheimer's gene, the amyloid gene, back when I was a student at Harvard. That was my doctoral thesis. And so the amyloid, as it accumulates, causes the tangles, which kill the nerve cells. In CTE, you don't need amyloid. The bangs to the head, the concussions, bring you directly to tangles without the need for amyloid to get there. In Alzheimer's, amyloid is what's actually hitting the nerve ending and causing the nerve cell damage that leads to the tangles. Then in both cases, whether it's a head bang at 20 years old, or multiple concussions, or amyloid coming at 40 years old, right? As the tangles form, they propagate and spread like little brush fires. And even that's not enough to give you Alzheimer's or CTE. That has to trigger inflammation. And then inflammation kills like 10 to 100 times more nerve cells than the tangles do. That's why in the books I write, when we talk about shield, the key is bring inflammation down in the body and brain, because then you can have those tangles propagating, but without inflammation, there's no forest fire.
Right.
I like to say head bangs or the amyloid plaques are like matches. The tangles are like the brush fires that spread. But until you get the forest fire of inflammation, you don't get dementia, whether it's CTE or Alzheimer's. And that's basically where we model all this. I make little mini human brain organoids the size of paper punches, and we can model this by having those nerve cells in the little mini brain in a dish make plaques, and then you get tangles, and then you get inflammation. We even have a dish that we bang with a with a device. We literally have mini brains in a petri dish, and we bang them like a concussion, and we get them to form tangles. We get regular nerve cells, human brain nerve cells, to form tangles by banging the crap out of them in a dish.
Wow.
So that's how we model CTE.
So basically it's a 3-step process between the plaque into the tangles into the inflammation, and the CTE basically takes out step 1 and just jumps right to stage 2.
Excellent.
Is that correct?
Yes. I wish my students were as smart as you. I usually have to explain that about 10 times when I'm teaching at Harvard. So very good.
Thank you.
Well, does he know where you went to school, Dave? I'm not sure that's a good thing if he knows.
Yeah. Well,
where did you go to school?
I went to Stanford.
Well, they say that Harvard's the Stanford of the East, so there you go.
Yeah, so I'm fascinated by this stuff. I think it's really interesting, and the application again to the fitness world is something that I love seeing the parallels. But before we jump off this topic, you talk about the inflammation being the part that we need to be really concerned with. But at the point of inflammation, is it too late? Is it too late to be able to apply the tenets of shield, where we're trying to maybe use those in the plaque phase, the tangle phase? By the time inflammation has hit, it's too late to be able to reverse the effects?
Well, it's better to do it earlier. But it's not too late. I think we can show that. I think, if someone's already suffering from dementia and inflammation is in a full forest fire, I don't want to give anybody false hope that shield is going to bring them, it's going to cure them. There are people out there who write books like that guarantee curing or reversing Alzheimer's using similar recommendations we've made in our books about shield. I wouldn't do that to somebody because I don't want to give false hope. And it may be that sometimes, like if you have high cholesterol, sometimes for some people, lifestyle isn't going to cut it to bring it down, so you have to have drugs. So I started a company with 2 kids when they were quite young. They were undergrads at Brown when I first met them, and I took a meeting with them because they were in the same fraternity I was in college, Sigma Chi, and I took a meeting with them, and that led to a company and to a drug combination that protects your nerve cells against inflammation. So the inflammation is still trying to kill, but it's like giving a bulletproof vest to the nerve cell. And we tried it in ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and the trial worked just this past year. And it was a big paper in the New England Journal of Medicine and front page New York Times story and everything. And now we're going for FDA approval. And we're trying those same drugs in Alzheimer's, because across different neurological diseases, even depression, neuroinflammation is the enemy. So if you can protect against it. So in some cases, you might need drugs to do it. I have another company I'm working with that's trying to turn the neuroinflammation off, take out the killer. And that's a lot more difficult, to be honest. But shield is the best way to control neuroinflammation and inflammation your whole life. I just don't want to give false hope and say shield's going to cure an Alzheimer's patient. We haven't done those trials yet. Maybe it can, but until you do the clinical trials, you can't make a claim like that. But we do know that it's the best way to help prevent the disease, to try to prevent the disease.
Right. Well, and can we? I was just going to say, Dave, can we just briefly talk through the rest of shield and what those?
Let's jump on to number 2.
Letters stand for. I mean, we've gotten very intrigued and lost into the first part of that, and kind of speaking through a little bit more. But I'm very curious to hear what these others are.
Yeah. Why don't I go through all of them and then we can go back, right?
Sure.
So S is sleep. H is handling stress. Of course, chronic stress leads to chronic inflammation. So that handling stress, we can get into how you do that. I is interaction with others, staying social, very important for brain health. E is exercise, obvious. L is learn new things, what people are doing with your show, unless we're putting them to sleep and we're still helping them, doesn't matter. And then D is diet. And so we can jump into each of those. H, handling stress. Well, chronic stress is bad. So learning how to, curb expectation, learning how to deal with bad news, taking on a meditation practice. We actually did a meditation trial, a real trial with meditation. This was with Deepak Chopra's center with meditators, and had like top people in the country doing analyses, like Elizabeth Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize for discovering the anti-aging enzyme telomerase. Mm-hmm. We showed meditation increased telomerase 20 to 40% increase in activity in 1 week of intensive meditation. We showed that inflammation genes got dampened down. So meditation is very important. And for people who say they don't have time to meditate, those end up being the people who need to meditate the most. So I have a very simple way to meditate. I like swimming. And what I do is after I swim, I just put a boogie board under my legs, like under my thighs, and you can use the water like an isolation tank. The Patriots actually have isolation tanks for this purpose. We put those in for this purpose. But you can just, kind of float effortlessly with a simple boogie board under your legs and use the water and as like an isolation tank. And it's a great way to meditate. So I like meditating after exercise because your heart's beating fast and you can focus more on your breathing and your heart, right after exercise. So I've always done it. Exercise, then meditate.
Is there a specific amount of time that you recommend, or what do you do in terms of
20
minutes?
20 minutes after exercise. And then, I like to do another 10 or 20 at night. But, if you have a cocktail or some wine with dinner, it's a little, it's a little tougher to meditate, but you can still try to do it then too.
Mm-hmm. Any questions for you, Chad, on the stress side of things? I know 2020 has been extra stressful for everyone. And this one seems to be probably one that people need to put at the top of their list, specifically with 2021, with 2020.
Yeah, no, it just all sounds exactly, the way that we approach everything and the way that we're trying to get people to prioritize and do certain things so they can reach their potential, so they can make changes physically, so they can be better at whatever they're trying to be better at with what we're coaching. Weightlifting, I don't know why they'd want to be better at gymnastics, but I guess gymnastics too, Dave, I'm not sure. But we've had a couple breathing experts on here and have talked us through, nasal breathing and all that stuff. And, what you talked about there with meditation and focusing on your breathing and everything else. Have you guys looked into, any breathing practices specifically to aid in what you're trying to accomplish with SHIELD or any of your other research?
Yeah. I mean, if you're stressed, the fastest way to stop stress is through breathing. I mean, your breath controls everything. So, you may be hyperventilating, or you may not be breathing because you're scared, and you just got to, as soon as you're stressed out, breathe 5 seconds in, hold 2 seconds, breathe 5 seconds out, right? That's start 5 in, hold 2, 5 out. Or if you can't hold 2, hold 1. And if with meditation, you try to bring that eventually as you meditate to 10 in, hold 1 or 2, 10 out, 10 seconds out. So that will instantly calm you. I mean, that's the best way to hit stress right away is with breathing. If you're upset, somebody's upsetting you and you're starting to be reactive, or breathing solves everything. I mean, it's a huge tool. Yeah.
I do that with my daughter now. When she's freaking out, just breathe. Let's do a deep inhale, nice little hold, deep exhale. So I got to play it myself. My 4-year-old, it works pretty well.
Yeah. Hey, Ella too. And you might need to check this out, Dave. There's an app called Breathe Kids, I think, that Ella and we would look at it every night for like a year. But it just takes you through different breathing routines and tells stories and stuff like that. So that might be really good for the kiddo there. But yeah, sure. Ella as well. Sometimes we have to just say, hey, focus on your breathing. But, the thing about breathing, and you talking about meditation, even for me, in this field, in this health field, when I think about meditation and that word, it's a turnoff. I'm scared of it. Like, oh, that's going to cost time. How am I going to make myself do that every single day? But when I think about it, not as meditation, but simply as, hey, focus on your breathing for a little bit. If we take maybe the meditation word out of it and say, hey, let's just breathe, through your nose and do that for, like you said, 5 seconds and hold, and then 5 seconds out, or however many seconds that is for those people to allow them to calm down. I think for a lot of people, myself included, that's a better way to put it. But, since we had those other breathing experts on, Dave, and I've been experimenting with it, I'll tell you, I found a huge difference in my ability to recover from like a CrossFit workout where, I throw myself on the ground right after I'm done every time. Right, Dave? So, but now because I'm breathing out of my mouth, in and out quickly, and I can't really control that if I push myself to an extent right after, but I'll make myself start breathing in my nose and out my mouth after about 10 breaths of just mouth breathing. And then I'll do different cycles and try to slow it down, purposely slow it down. And there's a huge difference. So I'm on the ground now, Dave, only about 2 minutes instead of the 10 minutes I was before. So it's very powerful.
Yeah. The whole mouth versus nasal breathing thing is quite interesting, especially for sleep. There's studies of, trying to control that during sleep as well. I mean, there are people I know who have taped their mouth shut when they sleep, right? Just to try to see if you feel any better with nasal breathing during the night.
Yep.
I haven't tried that yet.
Yeah, that was one of the recommendations from Patrick McEwen, who wrote Oxygen Advantage, who we had on not that long ago. And we started doing the same thing with our workouts, testing out workouts with just taping our mouth shut to only do nasal breathing through pretty intense workouts, just to kind of see. It's very, very challenging, especially if you hit a pretty high intensity. But it's interesting to see over time whether or not that allows for capacity to increase.
Yeah, in the winter, I would definitely get a humidifier in the room before you try it, because if your nose gets dry, you're going to wake up pretty fast. So.
Right.
Yeah. So I is interaction with others, and that's mainly for the brain than the rest of the body. But we're social beings, and our brains are healthier when we interact. And basically, loneliness is a risk factor for Alzheimer's. It's not being alone. If you're alone and like it, it's fine. It's a form of stress. To be alone and unhappy is a form of stress. So it's kind of like the I in interaction goes together with handling stress, and it also helps with the L of SHIELD, learning new things. Because when you're with people, you're talking about stuff, you're probably learning something new. And if you're talking about current events, I guess you have to avoid talking about politics because that can cause stress. But learning something new is good. So interaction, but loneliness increases risk for Alzheimer's across studies by about twofold.
Wow. And obviously, again, this year being a pretty lonely year for people with quarantine and seclusion, it's something for us to be extra cautious about, or at least aware of this particular time.
Yeah, I've done, I just did a segment for the Dr. Oz show. It'll be on later, I guess, this month, or maybe I missed it already. But on SHIELD. And, I told people, look, call your parents or your grandparents, call the older folks in your family, who are shut up at home, because this lack of interaction is bad for them and they're more vulnerable. Like it's really important right now during COVID quarantine to call the oldest folks in your family and just Zoom with them or FaceTime if they can, or call and talk to them.
Right. That's really good advice. I mean, I just noticed it for myself. And, I have my wife and my kids here, but just the lack, Chad and I travel majority of our year. We're doing clinics and meeting people around the world 30 plus weekends out of the year. And that being taken away from us has definitely changed the way that we interact with people. I love being here with my kids, but it's definitely a lot different than the amount of people that we were in contact with on a daily basis. And I already noticed myself like missing that, almost like needing it, the ability to kind of, Chad, would you say the same thing for you? Like, I feel like I'm in need of more human interaction that I'm missing from this past year.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you say that, Dave, because I was just thinking as Dr. Tanzi was talking through that and explaining, how or to what extent is that relatable to an introvert? I'm more of an introvert, I would say, Dave. I mean, I think you probably have a little bit of that as well, where you need some alone time, but I don't think it's as affected me as much as you in that way, just because I am very introverted. But, I wonder, it makes me wonder what extent of that is relatable to someone that's extremely introverted. And I know we still all need social interaction and to talk to our loved ones and everything else. But I'm curious as to how you guys came across that information, or why was it that you looked in specifically to social interaction as a healing agent kind of thing for the brain?
It was just reading papers from folks who study it, just reading one paper after another, that loneliness was a risk factor. And people have written, books on this about social isolation being an issue as you get older. Folks, it could be arthritis or some other reason they don't want to go out, or they're depressed. And it's a downward spiral. You don't interact with others, and then you go down faster. So even as you get older, if your hearing starts to go, right, you can be with people, but if you don't realize you have impaired hearing and you can't interact as well in the conversation, that's another. They say hearing loss is a risk factor for Alzheimer's. So it's not really neurological. It's the fact that if you can't hear well, you also become disengaged and alienated from the conversation. And you might be with people, but you're still not socially interacting. In COVID, we talk about social distancing. It's not social distancing, it's physical distancing. That's what we need to do. There's still, you can still interact socially through online medium and different ways. So the correct term is really physically distancing is what we have to do as we get through this. So yeah, so that's interaction. E is exercise, and we can save that for last, or and I can just quickly go through L&D if you want, or we whatever.
No, let's do exercise now. Let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Exercise is equal to sleep for the brain. And that's saying a lot, because in the past, I would have said sleep was number one. But I've come to realize in our own research that exercise is tied for number one with sleep.
And
yeah.
I mean, this obviously, our world is all about this. So I'm really curious about what you had to say.
In fact, we're doing a trial at the McCann Center with sleep and exercise together, because if you exercise more, you'll sleep better. And if you sleep better, it's easier to exercise. So we're doing using that as like a virtuous cycle, is what we would call it, of sleep and exercise. So what does exercise do for the brain? Well, one thing it does is it induces the birth of new nerve cells in a part of the brain that is most affected as you get older by Alzheimer's pathology. So all of us start to get Alzheimer's pathology after 40 years old. And that's the plaques and the tangles. And especially if you're an athlete and you're prone to head bangs or concussion, again, that's the part of the brain that gets affected, is the hippocampus. That's the short-term memory area. Hippocampus is Greek for seahorse, because it looks like a seahorse, literally. And most parts of your brain, you can't make new nerve cells when you're an adult, right? But it turns out in the hippocampus you can. It's called neurogenesis, birth of new nerve cells. And what we found is that in Alzheimer's patients, neurogenesis is down. And if you want to induce neurogenesis, you exercise. And so we studied how exercise induces neurogenesis. And what it does is exercise increases blood flow. And the blood flow literally brings in proteins from outside the brain, from places like the liver and the gut. And the blood flow, when it's increased with exercise, increases these proteins into the brain. We call it transcytosis, through the blood-brain barrier into the brain. And then these protein factors then induce neurogenesis, but that's not enough to help you. we showed that neurogenesis alone is not sufficient. Remember that neurogenesis is giving birth to little baby infant nerve cells, right? So these infant nerve cells will not live long because if they're being born in a battleground, let's say you're older and there's inflammation in your brain, a new nerve cell doesn't have a chance. It's going to be, it's a baby born in a combat zone. So you need something else. And what you need is a growth factor in the brain called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. And it turns out that exercise also massively induces BDNF. So with exercise, you get two things. You get the birth of new nerve cells, neurogenesis, and then you get what would be like miracle grow for the nerve cell, BDNF, to keep that nerve cell alive, and so that it can actually contribute to brain health. And exercise does both. So we just found this only over the last couple of years. We had a big paper in Science about this, and another group followed up with a replication of our data, and they showed a liver factor that gets induced and the blood flow brings it in. So this is a kind of an evolving story right now about how exercise actually reinforces the part of the brain that's most vulnerable as you age with new nerve cells and keeps them alive with the right growth factors, BDNF. It's pretty amazing stuff.
Oh.
That's not all, but exercise does other stuff for the brain too. That's just part one.
That's fascinating. So the BDNF, can that be, is exercise kind of unique in the fact that it does that, or are there other systems in the body that allow for that to happen as well?
Well, there are supplements. So to be honest, we're trying to mimic the effects of exercise with combinations of supplements.
Okay.
Right. We were going to look at different drugs to do it, but it turns out you don't need drugs to do it. You can do it with supplements. So there's a supplement, and again, the two I'm going to mention I'm commercially involved with, but I'm commercially involved with them because scientifically I believe in them. So I just want to state that disclaimer. But for inducing neurogenesis itself, we use a supplement called nicotinic riboside. Nicotinamide riboside is it's sold as a product called True Niagen from a company called Chromadex. And I'm a consultant for Chromadex, just for disclosure. But nicotinamide riboside induces neurogenesis. But then you still need the BDNF. And so what we found was among different supplements that do it, one of the best was a woody vine from the Amazonian rainforest called cat's claw. And so I helped a friend of mine start a company to sell cat's claw as a supplement called Percepta. And again, I'm not doing this to sell the supplements. I'm just telling you where we're going with this, because I made the disclosure about the companies, but we're testing to see whether these two supplements, and there are other supplements that induce BDNF, coffee fruit extract, not the caffeine, but there's something called Bacopa monieri. We have a whole list of different natural supplements that induce BDNF. I'm using the cat's claw just because it was potent. But for inducing neurogenesis, the only one we found was this nicotinamide riboside that we use. So again, there's nothing better than exercise, but I take both those supplements in the morning just to get a little more.
Sure.
I suggest them to local sports teams that I work with, so yeah.
Now on the exercise side, really quickly, Chad, I know I'm just excited about these things. It's exciting.
Oh yeah, me too.
On the exercise side, is there an optimal amount? And the reason why I ask, because in our world in CrossFit, there's a tendency to overdo it, should we say, sometimes. And athletes in the CrossFit world are all about kind of going at 100% all day, every day with their training. And they kind of look at the intensity side of the workout as kind of the most important piece. And I'm curious if there's a point of diminishing returns with regards to the amount of exercise that is beneficial.
Well, to get the blood flow going enough to induce neurogenesis and BDNF, you need minimally 20, preferably at least 30 minutes.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be fully aerobic. Like I got, my recumbent bike, if I do 30 minutes at 80 RPM or 80 to 90 RPM, that's enough to get my heart rate up. My heart rate's resting heart rate is probably around 52. And so if I do 80 or 90 RPM for a half hour, that gets 52, that gets me up to about 85. And then that I know for me is enough percent increase in heart rate that I'm getting blood flow to the brain. So 20 to 30 minutes, and I'm older, I'm probably double your age. I'm an older guy, but unless you guys just look young, I don't know.
Yeah.
But
we sleep very well and we exercise, so we probably do look a little young.
That's probably what it is. Yeah. So I would say that, like, for older folks, get minimally 20 minutes per day. If you can get 30 minutes, better. If you have a Fitbit, aim minimally at 8,000 steps per day. Better to get 10,000.
And there's no point that you've seen any of the literature, any of the research where it can be too much exercise. So say some of these people are doing 5 hours of training a day, and
I don't think you can get too much exercise.
All right.
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. I mean, I don't, they can't, there's no, I mean, unless it's related to your joints and arthritis and wear and tear. That's
not
different.
from a brain perspective, essentially.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I always played full court basketball for most of my life. I played soccer in college and high school, but then I switched to basketball because it was easier to play, indoor, especially living in Boston. But, I was playing like minimally 5 hours of full court basketball a week up until about a year ago. But my knees are gone. I overdid it, and now my knees are gone, and eventually I'll probably have to get a replacement or two. But that's the only downside, I guess, to too much exercise.
Sure. All right, that's actually good info. People are going to love hearing that, Chad.
Yeah, people are going to definitely love that. I'm loving it. I'm excited to hear these things about exercise. And I was very surprised, Rudy, that you put exercise right there on the same line as sleep. And I love hearing that. And it makes sense to me too, because anytime, I mean, luckily I haven't been sick. I don't get sick very often. I haven't been injured very often in my career, but anytime I've been sick, by making myself go ahead and work out, maybe not as intensely as I would have otherwise, or if I've been injured or been in pain, if I just go ahead and do what I can and get in there and work out and get a sweat going and everything else, I always heal up quicker. I always feel better. And there's no doubt about it. There's, no one can tell me any different that it didn't make me heal faster. And so I'm excited to hear you say that. And one of the questions that came to my mind as you were explaining that was talking about sleep and exercise, or even lacking in any of these other areas. Can one make up for an inability to sleep by getting on a better, stronger, more beneficial exercise routine? Say, for example, if they're only able to sleep 5 hours a night and it's 1 or 2 hours less than what they ideally need, and it's catching up on them on a regular basis. If they're working out, for an hour, 5 or 6 days a week, and it's good quality workout, can they make up for that, and vice versa? Can they sleep extra to make up for lack of exercise?
So that's a great question. So there are things that sleep can do that exercise can't, right? Like consolidation of memory, dreaming, and everything I explained about dreaming and taking, reinforcing your memory. But one thing, it's a perfect segue to what else exercise does. One thing exercise can do that's the same as sleep is clear protein, debris, and garbage out of your brain. So the other form of mental floss, clearing your brain other than sleep, is exercise. And this is relatively new. In fact, the paper describing this is under review at a journal right now. It's not even out yet. And so Bruce Spiegelman at the Joslin Diabetes Center at Harvard discovered this protein called irisin, irisin, irisin. And it turns out that when you exercise, you induce irisin. And irisin is just really good for the body. It's but it's also, it turns out, very good for the brain. And what irisin does, as it turns out, is it helps turn down inflammation, but it also turns on a gene that makes an enzyme that eats up the debris in your brain, which is amyloid.
Mm.
So as you get older, we're making amyloid in our brains all the time. And as you get older, that amyloid builds up. And it's kind of like building up headbangs. It's going to lead to the tangle pathology and then eventually inflammation and on its way to Alzheimer's. So you want to get rid of amyloid in your brain. And sleep is one way. Well, with exercise, through this pathway where exercise induces irisin, irisin turns on a gene that makes an enzyme called neprilysin. And the neprilysin is like a Pac-Man that gets released and it eats the amyloid.
Mm.
And then that gets cleared from your brain when you go to bed. So it's like kind of like pre-chewing the amyloid before you go to sleep. Mm. And so exercise actually the first evidence that exercise gets rid of amyloid was 10 years ago. That was shown that exercise induces the removal of amyloid from the brain over maybe 15 years ago. It was first shown. We just didn't know how. Mm. And now we worked out the mechanism of how exercise does it. That's the new study that's under review right now from Bruce Spiegelman and his protege Christine Rahn. So that's a double whammy of sleep. Mm. Neurogenesis, BDNF, less inflammation, and taking out the garbage, removing the amyloid from the brain, does all of that.
Can I ask you one thing about just the amyloid in general? Because some amyloid is good, right? It's part of the immune system in general, and you want some of it there. Is there a point where you're potentially attacking too much of it?
Yeah. You did your homework. Yeah, so amyloid, the protein that makes amyloid in the brain, called amyloid beta protein, just the single little protein, actually is an antimicrobial peptide. It means that it's a little protein that when a virus or a bacteria gets in, the amyloid beta protein sticks to it and then traps it in a plaque. Mm-hmm. And that's a good thing. You're protecting your brain. But if you get too much amyloid, then that can cause too many tangles, just like too many headbangs can cause too many tangles. And now that will stop propagating pathology toward Alzheimer's. So you want amyloid beta protein there to do its job, but you don't want too much infection leaking into your brain. Mm. And again, the brain has a blood-brain barrier. So some people who are hearing me right now on the medical side is going to say this guy's full of crap because the brain does everything it can to keep infection out. It has a blood-brain barrier. Mm-hmm. But the fact is, as we get older, that blood-brain barrier does become compromised. And bacteria can sneak in, even fungus, viruses get activated in the brain. And that happens more as we get older, as the immune system goes down. So as you get older, you have to worry about whether low-grade infection might be triggering amyloid as a protective thing. And then too much amyloid causes the tangles and gets you on your way. That's also why you have to, I have to add something. I should probably say D is diet, but I should say D is dental too, because it turns out that one of the biggest sources of protein, of bacteria that can potentially infiltrate the brain is your mouth, is your gums. And it's so important to floss every single day, especially as you get older, because we're actually taking postmortem autopsy brains of Alzheimer patients and people who didn't have Alzheimer's. And we're saying, what's the difference in terms of the microbes we find in there? And the only microbes we find in higher levels in Alzheimer's versus the, control brains are periodontal bacteria. Wow. The bacteria that propagate in your gums as a result of gum disease or gingivitis.
That's super interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. How do we jump to L, learning new things?
Yeah, L's learning new things. It's very simple. Alzheimer's disease, the degree of dementia due to Alzheimer's correlates with how many synapses you lose.
Sure.
So you have 100 billion neurons. You have tens of trillions, if not hundreds of trillions of some people, especially the ones who went to Stanford, of synapses. And these synapses or connections, the more you lose it, right? So the thing is, you have to try to learn new things to make new synapses, because the more synapses you make, it's called synaptic reserve. Literally, the more things you learn, the more synapses you make, the more resilience you have, right? The more synapses you can lose before you lose it. So the more you create redundancy with your synapses by learning new things. And that means also sleep, because it's during sleep with dreaming, you're also learning new things, believe it or not. With exercise, you're also strengthening resilience because you're dropping inflammation and you're dropping the amyloid that's going to hit those synapses. So these things all connect together.
Yeah.
So learn new things, not brain games. If brain games teach you how to focus and learn, great. But it's literally about taking time to learn new things.
Yeah. I love that.
Sounds like the only
Chad.
reason to learn gymnastics maybe is for some extra synapses. That's the only motivation I can find.
You know, it would be, I think that's a great idea. I think you guys should just focus on each other's Olympian skill sets, you know.
There you go.
You should do more weightlifting, Dave, and Chad, you do more gymnastics. It would be great for your brain.
And for the exercise side of things. But I've taken on, during pandemic, I'm curious if any of you guys have taken on any new things during pandemic to kind of ease the blow of not being able to interact or do the normal things. I started calligraphy and I started golf over the course of the last few months, and both of them have been amazing. To start as a beginner again, I think we get so tied up in the fact that we're experts in our own specific fields, that's where we spend all of our time, that suddenly just being a beginner from scratch, not knowing anything. I took my first golf lesson this past week, and I'm like, teach me. Nice. I'm a blank slate, just starting from zero, and it's been really fun. I mean, aside from the benefits of the brain, it's just so nice to be a beginner again.
Yeah, I'm just writing a lot more music. So I have my keyboards back there. And so I'm doing, I have a website where I put all my original music that I play, piano pieces. And so I'm just writing a whole lot. I wrote, I don't know, 4 albums since March 1st, since COVID.
Wow.
Yeah, and I put them all on a free website. It's all free streaming. I don't make money off of music. It's just, well, when I record with professional bands, they pay me whether I like it or not. Sometimes they don't. But you know, I put everything online, you know, streaming and download for free. And I love doing that. And actually my website, I get about 15,000 listens per day. So,
wow, it's incredible. Yeah,
wow.
You're a renaissance man, Rudy.
It's a sideline, you know, it's like, and so I just keep putting stuff out there. If people want to listen to it, I'll keep playing it, you know.
That's fantastic. I did see that you had recorded some stuff with Aerosmith and did some big events over the years. It's not a small hobby. It's actually something pretty considerable.
Yeah, so I do keyboards for Joe Perry, the guitarist from Aerosmith. So on an Aerosmith album, I'll take care of I'll do the keyboards like on the Joe Perry songs. And then Joe Perry's last album, he just did solo album last year. I did all the keyboards for that. And but my own music is more jazz, ambient oriented. It's more like Keith Jarrett or Bill Evans piano solo stuff. It's very different than what I do with Aerosmith. So, yeah.
Amazing. What about you, Chad?
I've got to ask. New? Well, yeah, I'll touch on that, but I've got a question for you, Rudy, in that regard. But I would say, Dave, probably it's just keeping up with Ella. You know, Ella's has gotten more into skateboarding, so of course I got to get on the board and try a little bit. And I'm still terrified and scared, but she also has an electric skateboard that's a little bit easier for me to get on there and ride. And then riding bikes a little bit more often and stuff like that. And to be fair, I have been doing a lot of burpees. Those are gymnastics like, and a lot of push-ups and handstand push-ups and stuff like that. So you'd be proud of that. But, you know, Rudy, you talk about all this writing music that you've been doing, and you said this is kind of a side gig. And of course you do all this research, and also you've written these books before. And I'm a writer as well, or at least I write a blog, and I'm heading towards hopefully completing a book at some point in my life. And I got to wonder, you know, with all the other things that you do, what is it about writing and writing books specifically that you're so drawn to that you're willing to make that time that it takes to get that job done?
Well, you know, writing a book is, you know, it's hard. I mean, there's a reason why, you know, after the last book came out, the Healing Self came out, I haven't, you know, despite the fact that my agent and my publisher, you know, wants me to write a new book, because all those books were bestsellers, you know, they did well. And, but it's a lot of time and effort. And so you really have to feel passionate about putting something out there and teaching someone something new that you think the world should know in order to take the time to write a book. Especially if you're going to get a book especially with a book contract and there's a deadline and you have to deliver. I mean, it's stressful actually, you know? So I decided after the last book came out, it was a trilogy I did with Deepak Chopra, and the third book came out. I took a break because I want to put more time into research and into music, mainly in my research. But I am itching now to write a new book but I think you do have to come up with a topic you're totally passionate about in order to write a good book. Because if you write a book just for the sake of writing a book and saying, I'm going to try to write a book and put it out there, it won't be a good book. You have to be crazy passionate about what you're going to write about.
Absolutely. Because you got to sit in front of the
sounds
computer
like you are,
and in front of a notepad or whatever
it is.
Well,
you got to research.
Write on that specific topic. Yep.
Yeah, you got to research.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then when you start writing, the book turns out totally different than when you started. And then you got to like reshuffle chapters, and it's a whole journey. I mean, it's a crazy journey, and it really is a long journey. And every single day that I sit down and write, and I try to write for 2 to 3 hours a day, it's like I get a little bit overwhelmed with how far away I am from accomplishing my goal. And it's just like this big mountain that you have to climb. And, right now I'm somewhere towards the beginning of it or close to the middle. And it's very overwhelming, and you definitely have to be passionate about what you're writing about. And I think writing in general as well to get the job done. How many hours a day would you say you spend on writing when you're really in the midst of a deadline? I would say that the average over the entire, so each book I've written took about 2 years.
Right.
And it required an average of 3 to 4 hours per day.
Wow.
Including the research and the writing and the editing and everything else. And that was with a co-author who did, half the work with Deepak Chopra. And so if I was doing it alone, it would probably be more like 4 to 6 hours per day. So you got to really, if you have a deadline, like a book contract and a deadline, and your solo is probably going to be 4 to 6 hours per day. And I think for those out there who are listening, who are just authors full time, they're going to say, "Bull, let's try 8 hours a day."
Right.
Yeah. But look,
awesome. Yeah, I'm just
if you're not under a contract and a deadline, I think 2 to 3 hours a day is perfect, actually.
Yep.
That's probably.
Yeah, I'm just always interested to ask about that with especially someone like you. It's written multiple books. I'm very intrigued about it, and I think the listeners also enjoy just hearing, what did it take to accomplish any specific goal, the specific goal of writing a book. What did it take for you to accomplish, along with all the other things that you did? So I appreciate that information.
I got to tell you, writing music is a lot faster and a lot more fun. I have to, so that's why I'm doing that right now. Because I write, music is a relaxing thing, and I got to tell you, when I'm writing a book and I'm up against a deadline, like I can feel my heart, kind of racing sometimes. And like I like to write in front of the TV, which is bad. I like to write with a glass of wine and watching like a baseball game, because I need a certain distraction in order to focus. Some people are like that, some are not. But yeah, so
yep. Very cool.
We want to jump
into
the last one here, the D.
Yeah, so diet, it's really all about the bacteria that live in your gut microbiome. So the gut microbiome bacteria, and there's thousands of different strains, really are symbiotic with you. They're there to help you. And when they're in balance and they're happy, and you don't have one particular bacteria taking over the colonies of the others, because these bacteria are fighting all the time. They all want to be, the king of the hill, right? I think it's a Game of Thrones. These bacterial colonies are constantly going at it, but they find balance, right? And when the bacteria are well balanced, there's a gut-brain axis. So your gut literally communicates physically with your brain through the vagus nerve and through your bloodstream, your blood, vessels, so that your gut, like we actually showed this in studies I can actually, in Alzheimer's, transgenic Alzheimer model, so mice where they have the human Alzheimer genes and they get plaques in the brain and inflammation, you can actually get rid of the plaques by changing their gut microbiome. You can affect the inflammation through their gut microbiome. We can treat the bacteria in the gut and make the Alzheimer mice either better or worse. So this is for real, that the gut microbiome directly affects the health of your brain. It affects your mood. So the whole thing is keeping your gut bacteria happy and balanced. When they're not balanced, it's called dysbiosis. Dysbiosis. What causes dysbiosis? Stress, lack of sleep, lack of exercise, junk food, too much sugar, too much fat. And so basically, to keep the bacteria happy, everything has to be done in shield. Plus, your diet should be very heavy in a plant-based diet. So your gut bacteria love fiber. They love plants. So a lot of people say, oh, I don't have to worry about it. I take a probiotic. Oh, I eat yogurt. Well, yogurt has 5, maybe 10 of the thousands of bacterial strains that are in your gut. I mean, they're good ones. And if you take a probiotic pill, maybe if you're taking an expensive probiotic pill, it's 1 billion bacteria. Well, you have trillions of bacteria. So like you're adding a little drop of bacteria. Mm-hmm. If you want to, it's more important to keep your trillions of bacteria happy with prebiotics, meaning fiber. So that means fruits, vegetables, seeds, grains, tree nuts, anything that where there's fiber and the bacteria can eat. It's bacteria food. Mm-hmm. You have to think of it like you have a fish bowl, you have to feed the fish. And in this case, your fish bowl is your gut and your bacteria are the fish. And if you want, and as long as they're happy, your brain's going to be healthy. And they want plants. That's what they want.
So I've seen you basically say Mediterranean diet is the best one out there that kind of encompasses all of these things. A little bit more plant-based, some fish, a little bit less on the sugar side, a little bit less on the heavy meat side. Is that kind of the diet that you adhere to?
Yeah, I'm also vegetarian. I gave up. I became a vegetarian in college for a girlfriend, and all of a sudden, physically, mentally, I just felt so much better. I never went back. So I do eat dairy, and if there's something with eggs in it, I eat that. So I'm lacto-ovo vegetarian. Mm-hmm. I'm not a vegan, but I don't eat any meat, fish, chicken, nothing like that. So I'm Mediterranean diet, but no meat or fish or chicken.
Just another little back and forth between me and Chad. You mentioned having a glass of wine while you write. Are you more of a wine guy and a beer guy? I'm definitely more on the wine side as opposed to Chad, who's a beer guy.
Yeah, so I agree with both of you guys. I love good wine, but I really love a good IPA too. So yeah.
Nice. I've gotten much more into IPA the last couple of years. I don't know if my taste buds are changing or just something different or what, but I like a good IPA as well. And in that regard, I was going to ask, talking about the brain, what are the effects, either negative or positive, of alcohol on the brain, whether that's a certain amount that's maybe beneficial or not?
So there was a study that said, a glass of wine a day, which for most people, meaning, and the study was done at University of Bordeaux. So mm-hmm. A glass there is literally like a Bordeaux glass. So that would be more like, probably a quarter of a bottle of wine.
Sounds like my kind of glass right there.
Yeah. So they said a glass of wine a day actually helps prevent Alzheimer's, and there are other studies that looked at, and there were also these, different types of, what makes the wine purple. These phytoanthanins and different types of compounds, phenolic compounds that are good for the gut and good for the brain. But the main thing about alcohol is a little bit of alcohol helps with blood flow. It helps literally thin the blood, right? So one of the main risk factors for Alzheimer's is high blood pressure and leading to stroke. Many strokes can lead directly to vascular dementia, but the damage to the brain due to a stroke, like the damage due to head bands, can also lead to Alzheimer's pathology. So heart healthy is brain healthy, right? We all know that. What's good for the heart's good for the brain. Well, a little red wine a day, or maybe an IPA a day, just the alcohol, I mean, even just, it could be any alcohol, just to thin the blood a little bit, is good for the neurovasculature. Now, of course, if you drink too much, minimally two things go wrong. One is that the alcohol is bad for your brain. Too much alcohol can actually kill neurons in your brain. But also remember, it's your liver that's producing some of these proteins that we now know go to your brain and make it healthy. So a bad liver can be a bad brain too. So you don't want to overdo it, but, I think a big glass of wine a day, or 2 small glasses, or maybe a couple of IPAs is probably not going to hurt you. Or if it's a cocktail, with a shot or so of alcohol in it, a day, it's probably better than not having it. I know that's controversial, and the Alcoholics Anonymous people are going to be mad at me for saying that, but thinning the blood a little bit is good for the neurovasculature, and that's good for the brain.
Well, I'm an even bigger fan now, Dr. Tanzi. I can keep my 2 beers a day going, so I'm happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you've made us all pretty happy with saying that you can't get too much exercise, and now with Chad having his 2 beers, you become A+ guest.
Exercise hard and reward yourself with
exactly. It's a very CrossFit perspective. Exactly.
That's right.
I wanted to ask you one more question before we get you out of here, and it has to do something that I heard you say in another podcast with regards to the advances that were happening in 2020. And I think early on during pandemic, you had mentioned, I heard you say that 2020, while it was kind of a shit year for everyone in terms of what happened with COVID and everything else along with that it was going to be a pretty important and critical year in terms of Alzheimer research and development. I'm curious now that 2021 is upon us, whether or not the things that you were anticipating with 2020 actually came through, and that it actually, the changes and the advances actually lived up to what you were expecting.
Mostly, I would say.
Okay.
One thing was this, I mentioned earlier, this drug combination with this company Amylyx. I helped these 2 young guys to start from Brown University. And again, for disclosure, I'm a co-founder of the company and have equity in the company. But, we did a trial in ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. And a lot of it was funded by the Ice Bucket Challenge. Remember the Ice Bucket Challenge for ALS? In fact, it was amazing because we got the results last year, and we were able to share the positive results of that trial. This is the first time there was a positive trial for ALS in ages, right? We were able to tell Nick Frates, the guy who was one of the people that started that Ice Bucket Challenge, who has ALS, that the Ice Bucket money that funded half that trial led to a successful trial, and we're probably going to have new drugs for ALS. We were able to tell him that 2 days before he passed away with ALS. It's pretty amazing.
Wow.
So that company was originally were going to do Alzheimer's, but when we saw how powerful the effect was on inflammation and protection in the lab-based models, we decided to swing for the fences and go for ALS. It's harder to treat ALS. And that worked out well because the ALS trial was successful. And now we're talking to the FDA now about going for approval. But in parallel, we're doing the Alzheimer's trial, but it hasn't finished yet. We're going to get a readout on that literally this month. We'll see how it did. So I'm hopeful for that, but we'll have to see. We don't know. But at least the ALS trial did work, and that's promising news. And then I have another set of drugs that, so we talked earlier about being reactive or proactive, right? Right now, the elephant in the room is that we don't diagnose Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or ALS until your brain or the central nervous system has degenerated to the point of dysfunction. Imagine if we did that with diabetes. Imagine if we didn't check insulin or glucose levels and we waited till your islet cells of your pancreas were gone and we said, okay, now you have diabetes. Or imagine with heart disease, instead of managing cholesterol, you waited till you have congestive heart failure. You say, oh yeah, you need to take this cholesterol medication.
Right.
So in these other age-related diseases, we're proactive. We measure cholesterol. We try to prevent heart disease by stabilizing it. We measure insulin. We measure glucose. Alzheimer's are finally doing that. we finally have tests for how much amyloid is in the brain based on a blood test. But what we need is a safe drug to bring that amyloid down if it's too high, just like we bring cholesterol down to stop heart disease. You need a safe drug that somebody might need to take for 30, 40 years.
Right.
It's like some people take a statin, Lipitor, for 30, 40 years. So every attempt to make drugs like that, safe drugs that can do that, have failed. I spent the last 20 years with my colleague in San Diego, Steve Wagner, making a drug to bring the amyloid down safely. And again, we don't want to wipe it out. We want to dial it down to a safe level. And we're kind of like last man standing. And we're not even a pharma company. We're a couple of academics at Harvard and UCSD, but we did manage to raise about $30 million over the last 20 years.
Wow.
And our drug right now is on its way to the FDA to get approval for the first trials. We have the data. We finally have the data we need to go to the FDA and say, please approve us to start phase 1 trials for safety in humans. It's a whole new class of compound, whole new class of chemical and drug. And if it's safe enough and good enough, not only will it be used to start preventing Alzheimer's disease in a proactive way, if necessary, when you're 40 or 50, but the first Alzheimer mutations that I and others ever discovered are the really bad ones that guarantee Alzheimer's by 60 years old. So the amyloid gene, these 2 other genes we found called presenilins, they have about 200 different mutations that account for maybe 1 to 2% of Alzheimer's. And it's the type of Alzheimer's that strikes under 60 years old, and it runs in families really strongly. So if you have a mom who had Alzheimer's at 50 with one of these mutations, you have a 50-50 chance of inheriting that gene mutation and then being guaranteed to get Alzheimer's by 50.
Right.
So it's the worst type of Alzheimer's. Our drug, based on our lab models, should reverse that.
Wow.
So, I spent my career talking to these families where you got you'll have a woman in your office who's 30 years old, and she has the mutation, and she's guaranteed to get Alzheimer's by about 45 for that mutation.
Brutal.
And she has kids, and she says, "You mean like by the time my kids are in high school, I'm not going to know who they are?" I mean, it's crazy.
My goodness. That's awesome.
And now this drug, for the first time, based on how we developed it, by learning from those mutations we discovered in the 80s and 90s, not only will help prevent Alzheimer's, hopefully, but will actually reverse what those mutations do.
That's incredible.
And so we're pretty psyched about that. But the key was to get enough safety data to say we can go to the FDA and get the first permission to put this whole new class of drug into a trial, a safety trial. And that's also going on right now, and we're on our way. And if everything goes well, the NIH already told us they will give us the money we need, $7 million, to do our safety trial.
Wow.
And this is all with no company involved. This is all just in Harvard and UCSD. So so that's the good news. And I did have one other trial I was involved with that didn't do so well, but that still has some hope as well. So it's not a full home run, but 2020, and looking back, has probably been, in my career, the most successful year for getting to drugs and trials in Alzheimer's that I've ever had. And I've been doing Alzheimer's research for almost 40 years.
That's incredible.
Since I was a kid. I mean, literally since college. So
Wow. Well, I think 2021 is going to be probably an exciting year in terms of being able to see those drugs move to that next stage. I did have just one quick question about you mentioned amyloid testing. Is that something that's readily available, and would you recommend people starting to get that at a certain age?
Well, for a while we've had brain imaging available, PET scans that can tell you if you have amyloid, but they cost about $5,000 out of pocket.
Okay.
See, they're FDA approved, but health insurance won't cover it because they say it's not actionable. Meaning, if you have a positive result for amyloid in the brain, they can't say, okay, now take this drug.
Sure. Hopefully the
new drug I just told you about will be the drug that will make it actionable.
Right.
So the blood test is about $1,500. So it's cheaper than the imaging, and it's approved, and it's pretty reliable. It kind of reflects what the imaging would show. But then once you have that result, unless you're really disciplined like you guys as Olympians and say, okay, I now know I have too much amyloid in my brain, I'm going to force myself to get 9 hours of sleep to clear it out. I'm going to force myself to do at least 2 hours of exercise a day to clear it out. That's actionable.
Right.
And that will help. If you don't have symptoms yet, and you don't have enough inflammation in the brain to give symptoms yet, that will help. The shield will help. So the only actionable thing you can do with the blood test is go hyper shield.
Right.
But not many people may be able to have the discipline to do that. So it's a decision you have to make yourself.
Would
but
you
hopefully
say
we'll have our drugs ready pretty soon as well.
Right. But around 40 years old, you'd say that would be something to potentially consider if it's in your wheelhouse to be able to get the testing?
Yeah, I think the future would be like, my daughter's 12, right? She'll turn a certain age, and the average age you get the blood test will probably be about 40, I'm predicting. Okay. But if you have a family history of Alzheimer's, you would take the earliest age of onset in your family, subtract 20 years, and do the blood test then. So if somebody in your family got it at 45 with these, rare early onset cases, you'd want to get that. Well, first of all, you get the gene test right away. And as soon as we can start giving you that drug safely, even in your teens, you're going to start taking it. So that's the extreme case. But for most people, it's going to be 40. It's going to be like cholesterol, right?
Yeah, right.
And in fact, in the future, just like younger and younger people test their cholesterol now, it may be that, and once this gets going, if the drug is safe or if shield is something that people will consider doing, you might see people just like they test their cholesterol when they're 30 years old, test their amyloid when they're 30 years old too.
Yep.
It's going to be very analogous to cholesterol.
Sure. That's what it seems like. There's a lot of parallels there. Yeah. Well, I'm incredibly impressed, and I thank you for kind of walking us through. I know we're novices when it comes to this stuff, but I really appreciate you kind of walking us through and giving us some real actionable things that we can bring back to our community. Is there someone that you would recommend us speaking to that you think would be great to have on the podcast? Maybe someone in your field or someone you've come across that you think that we could reach out to that would be another good guest?
Yeah, so I can't, there was I did an interview for some podcast that had to do with a guy who has risk for Alzheimer's genetically and is exercising like crazy, but I got to recall the name of this guy. I think he's writing a book. But the other guy, do you know the guy who does the marathons across the deserts? That he does
the ultra marathon stuff?
Yeah, but he also just runs, like he ran across Africa. This guy, Charlie. Hold on, let me get the book.
Chad, I think we got some pretty good take-home points here that I think we might need to be able to celebrate with a glass of wine and some beers tonight. Be able to say we're doing a lot of the right things right now.
I'm no doubt. I might accidentally have 3 or 4 instead of 2 just for a little extra celebration.
This guy, Charlie Engel.
Okay. Running man.
Yep.
He's really cool. He's like literally, he ran across the entire Gobi Desert. He like ran up Mount Everest or something. He's out of his mind.
Nice.
He's a great interview. He's a great speaker and a great interview. Charlie
Excellent.
Engel.
All right, perfect.
And then the other guy, do you know Dave Asprey?
Yes. Yeah, I've definitely heard of Dave before. Absolutely.
Yeah. He's a pretty good interview. He interviewed me. But there was one other guy, I have to find his name. And I think he was an ex-Olympian as well. And he's got a high-risk Alzheimer's gene, and he's exercising like crazy to try to fight it.
That's super interesting. I would love to speak with
I can get
like
back
that.
to you. I have to go back through my emails to find the guy's name.
Sounds good.
Yeah, that'd be cool to chat with him for sure to see how, his journey's going and how that started and everything else. But one of our other last minute questions is any books that you recommend. I think you just answered that with a couple of those that you put up. Are those recent books that you've read that you would recommend?
Oh yeah, they're both good. And then my book, The Healing Self, my newest book, that's definitely right up your alley. The Healing Self. That's my third.
Absolutely.
That's the last book.
Absolutely. And where can folks find those books? Your books, your 3.
Oh yeah, they're everywhere. They all would. Healing. It's on Amazon and anywhere there is books.
Okay.
They were
awesome.
They were all either New York Times bestsellers or international bestsellers. They did really well. But I'll attribute that to writing them a Deepak Chopra. I don't think more people know his name than my name, but so I had a little bit of advantage there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to digging into those myself, and really appreciate you coming on. It was an incredible conversation. I learned a lot, and really appreciate it. And I think there's, just looking at the other books and the topics there's so many other things that we could have talked about. But for this specific topic, I think our listeners are going to get a lot out of it. Do you have anything else coming up that you want folks to know about, or you want to put out there?
My music website.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Give it to us.
N1M, N as in Nancy, 1, M as in Mary, n1m.com/Rudy Tanzi, RUDYTANZI. I love when people listen to my music.
Yeah, we'll definitely put that in the show notes as well.
Here it is. So I did this podcast. It was called the Optimal Performance Guide. And let me just click on the link. That was the one no, that's not the right one. Sorry, that wasn't the one. Man, I don't know. I think I missed the whole segment about the exercise guy. I'm gonna have to find it for you.
No worries.
Yeah. All good. Yeah, we'll get that information and check it out for sure. But like I said, really appreciate you coming on. Maybe we can grab you for another recording at some point. Would love to chat with you about some more of the things that you're doing and some of these other books that you got. But for our listeners out there, guys, be sure to head over to PowerMonkeyFitness.com for services and upcoming events. Also check us out on our Instagram pages for regular teaching and technical content at Power Monkey Fitness, at Dave Durante, and at Ollie Chad. And on behalf of Power Monkey Fitness, we're your host. I'm Chad Vaughn with Dave Durante. And until next time, guys, thank you all for listening.